Hey guys, I wanted to kind of give a disclaimer. This is one of the best podcasts that I've done, but the audio is really bad. So if you can listen, pay attention, and try to decipher what is being said here, trust me, you're going to get a lot out of this one. But like I said, excuse the bad audio. Thanks, guys.
If you would like to sponsor the show or advertise on the Mythicist podcast, you can do so by going to www.mythicist.me and click on Sponsor the Show for more info. If you would like to support the show financially, you can do that also by going to mythicist.me and become a monthly supporter. We appreciate your monthly support. You are now listening to the Mythicist podcast, your portal to the paranormal, streaming live at mythicist.me, your hub for all things spiritual, esoteric and paranormal. And now, your host, Truth Seeker.
Hey, what's up? This is Truth Seeker. You're now tuned into The Awakening. Today we're speaking with Eric Dollard about the supernatural power of music and the type of effects that music has on the human body, and if it even affects your astral body, your mind, what you listen to. There's been a lot of studies done about the type of music that you listen to, that it affects the way that you perceive the world. Studies show that you retain 30% of what you hear and 70% of what you say. So whenever you're listening to music and you're repeating some lyrics, even if you don't believe those lyrics and you start repeating them over and over, you start to remember them. They'll come back in your psyche. You're going to remember what you say, because repetition reduces resistance. The more and more you hear a phrase, the more and more you come in contact with some type of work or sounds, the more and more that you're going to let your guard down and begin to form a pattern in your mind, and those thoughts are going to come back up. Music can almost take you back, almost summon feelings and emotions that you felt years ago, almost like a time machine. Say if you had an experience with a loved one years prior, and you hear a song, and that song can take you back and bring up those same feelings, those same emotions, and bring you back to that place. So with all this being said, we want to let you know that music is powerful. Music is a weapon. I'm almost reminiscent of the story of the Pied Piper, whenever he came into town to lead the rats out of the town by playing his magical flute, I believe it was. And he led the rats out, and the townspeople didn't pay him. So he actually came back wearing his bright colored clothing and playing his songs, but this time he got all the children to listen to him. So he was able to take all the children out of the town and keep them there with him. And I think that's what's going on now when we look at mainstream media and the mainstream music and understand the messages and the symbols and the different colors and all these type of things that's leading our generation through music, whether it's through MTV or BET or whatever. They can release a style of clothing, a song, and even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's not good, if enough people start doing it, the masses seem to follow. So we understand that music and tone and sound is vibrations. It actually affects your genetic makeup. When you start listening to music over and over, you begin to think differently. You begin to see the world differently. So that's why we're talking to Eric Dollard today about the power of music. I've seen some of his videos, and he talks about the work of Pythagoras, who is a big influence on my work and my worldview. Him and his brotherhood, if you read the works on him, the way that they reverence music and reverence life is pretty inspiring for those seeking a spiritual path or just want to be better individuals. So we're going to be speaking about music and spirituality all wrapped into one. So, Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So if you have anything to add with on those opening points that I made, if you have anything you can add to that.
Well, music goes even farther in that it establishes an archetype, and the archetype can actually exert a force on the ether and cause things to materialize or happen that normally would be physically impossible. This is what the Pythagoreans were basically into. And it's preceded by the science of numerology, where numbers themselves have specific powers. And if you use what's called the Chaldean number system, and you look at your phone numbers and your addresses and the addresses and phone numbers of people that you have relations with, you'll find that there's a common numerical denominator through all of this. And Pythagoras developed a system of ratios or logarithmic proportions, which today we call music, but at that time it was not designed for entertainment purposes or to be performed. It was more of a, it's kind of hard to say, it was kind of like a key or an access for them to get into these higher dimensions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's whenever you're listening to different metronomes, different beats, when you listen to drums and things like that, it's always been used to put you into a heightened state of awareness, a trance-like state. We know that everybody likes to refer back to the Africans whenever they play the drums and they conjure spirits or get into some type of trance where they're able to embody animals and things like that. So, and I think the same thing's going on through the mainstream media, but the energies that's being led behind these open doors are not positive on our culture. I think we can look at what's going on, and I think that's safe to say.
Well, basically, you have to remember that the music I'm referring to basically ceased to exist after 1750. So we're talking about a whole different reality in music that goes back to names like Kepler, Robert Flood, and numerous other people where in Flood's case you were dealing with a symbolic geometry or numerology that allowed you, through the Pythagoras method, to basically figure out where planets were that weren't even known about yet. And then Kepler did a similar thing, but rather than from the numerological and the spiritual standpoint, he did it from more the mathematical standpoint. Neither of them got along. They were kind of a schismatic split on the whole Pythagorean movement, which really got screwed up by the Dark Ages and the concept of the Earth being the center of the solar system. So in Pythagoras' time, things weren't looked up that way, and then when the Dark Ages came about, it got into that, basically the first theory of relativity, which is the Earth is the center of the universe and everything's relative to it, and music basically pretty much went dead through that interval, and then it started to come back to life through Kepler's time, and it finally reached its grand conclusion with Johann Sebastian Bach, that he was the Nikola Tesla of the music world, and he was basically just thrown in the garbage. His work just went to the dump after he died. Fortunately, somebody salvaged it, so we can still listen to this today.
So whenever we're talking about the work of Pythagoras, I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with his work can understand. They may be familiar with the term the Pythagorean theorem, which is how we measure music to this day, correct?
Well, the Pythagorean theorem is more of a geometrical thing. It actually is the fundamental theory of alternating current. It's very interesting that music and alternating current theory almost run hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
But Pythagoras was establishing through the musical interval a set of ratios. This was very important to them, was a set of ratios which would give a number. And it was this number itself that had the power. It wasn't the music being performed as an entertainment or for other people to listen to. It was almost kind of like a voodoo thing. And Pythagoreans believed that by establishing a system of ratios, we could ascertain as humans where we fit in the infinite logarithmic period that goes from the tiniest things to the largest things of the world, which the Pythagoreans viewed as a sequential progression or regression, and not like today where it's disjoint particles and atoms and things that don't even make any sense anymore.
Mm-hmm. So, would you say that the beats and metronomes and things like that has to do with Pythagoras as well, the way that we have those now, correct?
No, not necessarily. What the Pythagorean system consists of is a succession of tones which relate to wavelengths. So basically, the higher the pitch, the shorter the wavelength.
Mm-hmm.
So the proportion between these wavelengths, like 3 to 2 or 2 to 1, this is what the Pythagorean system is about, is a sequential series of these tones, or what we now refer to as melody. What you're referring to is rhythm, which is more of the timing of the thing, and the ratios, you can have the similar proportionality in rhythms, but you don't actually have the wavelengths and frequency. It's a differential thing where it's only at the dividing point of the measures in music till you hear the sound. It's not continuous.
Mm-hmm.
Now, around the time of Kepler, to the church music, what happened then was the simultaneous sounding of tones, which are now known as chords, which have the effect of producing materializations in space, depending upon planetary alignments and solar conditions and things that we don't even know about as the Earth flies through the universe that we pass through, which affects electrical devices and music. And the church, at that time, up to Johann Sebastian Bach, basically the churches, through the pipe organ and the acoustic dynamics of the church, which is extremely complex. I don't think anybody with the most advanced computer programs could ever duplicate that stuff today. Some of those pipe organs had as many as 15 or 18,000 pipes.
Mm-hmm.
And this was specifically designed to work with the church, which was kind of like an electrical network of coils and capacitors, but on a level, and then this thing pulled the cosmic energy out of the dielectric field of space with its copper roof, and it basically was a substation to God. It really doesn't differ too much than the transformer hanging on the pole outside your house, which takes the electricity, which would be completely unmanageable and dangerous in the house, and then brings that to a level where it's useful to your appliances and what have you, without just getting vicious and wild on you and blowing everything to smithereens. The church performed a similar function up to the time of Bach.
They were basically a transformer, someone that gets you in tune with God quite literally instead of what we see now, correct?
Yeah, it's actual polarization. It's like, the way iron filings are influenced by a magnet.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually experienced this. And
this is basically the scientific method behind the spirituality, correct?
Well, this is you have to know I'm an electrical engineer, so I view things in terms of electric fields.
Mm-hmm.
Things that we can't see, such as, if take example, a main power line that runs down the street of the town may have the same power flowing through it as typically maybe 3 to 4 locomotives.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those is a locomotive that's near 1 million watts worth of power. This energy is flying down the space between the wires at roughly 98% the velocity of light, yet it's completely imperceptible. And the birds land on the wires and nothing happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
So music gets into that realm where you're transforming between the ether world and the physical world, to put it roughly.
So you're talking about tones and frequencies and things like that they would listen to open up a higher state of consciousness, to get in tune with God, quite literally, to hear these tones.
Well, not necessarily tones, but ratios.
Okay.
The important concept here are what are called ratios.
Okay.
So if I have a tone that's 420 cycles a second, and then I have a tone that's 840 cycles a second, and that's the ratio of an octave.
Mm-hmm.
So when those two tones are played in succession, then when your mind hears, because your mind remembers the previous tone and then compares it with the subsequent tone, and the waveforms produced have specific shapes. They actually, you can, with dust on metal plates and what have you, you can actually see these waveforms, particularly with the type of oscilloscope I developed I call the time television, which turns the music into an actual three-dimensional entity that you can see on the screen. Each one of these notes has a shape like an atom. So when you start dividing the intervals up, each one of these becomes a more and more complicated. The fifth and the third and the fourth, and all of these become a more and more complicated entity.
Mm-hmm.
And your mind is assembling that entity. Now, when you sound the tone simultaneously, then you get the physical that you can see on the oscilloscope, which makes actual geometric patterns in the space that permeate your body.
Yeah.
Just like an electric field.
Mm-hmm. Because the body
it's
is
highly dependent on, it can't be, it does not work the same way every day. It's like my car is designed to sense the electric environment around me with a set of antennas on that. When I drive under these million-volt DC power lines, it causes all this fire to come off my antennas. and I could measure the voltage on the power lines and the polarity that way. And when I worked in LA, I had, for decades, I had to drive under this power line going out of town every day, and I kept a detailed record of the daily response. And even though everything looks the same one day to the next day, there'll be some days the fire will be there'll be some days the fire won't. There'll be some days it's more prominent on the positive wire than the negative wire as I drive through it, because there's something polarizing space. And this is the planets and the sun and the universe polarizes space, and music works through that polarization by adding on top of it.
So the theory works, but it doesn't work every day. It's almost like if you was to try the same method every day, it's going to be close, but it's not going to be exact. Is that what you're saying?
You may not get the same effects. See, and this is part of what the responsibility of the church was, is when they know these things were happening, and that's when it was time to fire the apparatus up.
Could anything backfire on you, though? So, like, if you're saying that something that produces a positive effect, would that same method in turn produce a negative effect on a different day, or are you pretty much...
Well, what I've determined in my decades of, listening to music and what have you, and devoting myself to it, is it's usually a heightened or lessened situation. Like, one day a piece of music might just have an absolutely profound effect on you, and then another day it just goes right through you, and it doesn't have any effect. It's not like it becomes negative, unless the music is designed to be negative.
Yeah.
Which today's music is designed to be negative. But it's also not harmonic, and it cannot tap into these energies. So today's music really is kind of more of a mechanical expression, so to say. It's like music in this zone. There's a lot of music zones. This is one of the things I do with the HF radio in my car, and I used to have a very massive installation for this with giant antennas that used the entire Earth as a stereo. So if there was a station broadcasting music in China, I could hear its reverberations all around the Earth and receive it in stereo and use the Earth as a concert hall. And the effects of the change from day to day were absolutely stunning when this happened.
Yeah.
So what I found from years and years of, analyzing the HF band and all these signals, on a wider scale just than for music, it's kind of, it's like something the National Security Agency would have, this massive facility with spectrum analyzers. And I kind of kept an eye on the HF band so that it wouldn't interfere with my operations or operations of the organizations or companies in which I was working with. And I learned a lot about the nature of music in different areas, and you can basically take the Earth and make vertical bands from the North Pole down to the equator of pretty much equal width, just like time zones, and each one of those widths is all the music in those particular countries or areas will have the same character to it. So, as you go from China and you start to move across to go back towards Europe, and you go through another band like India, and then you go through another band which contains the Middle East countries, another band that contains Europe. Each of these bands has specific type of music, and not all of them are of the Pythagorean ratios. There's quite a few different ratio systems out there.
Okay. So whenever people are listening to different tones and frequencies to get into a trance-like state through a meditation, is this somewhat the same principle? Can it be applied? The tones that put you into a happy state when you hear a sound, or make you feel frustrated, and things like that whenever you hear a certain sound. Is the same principle applied?
Yeah, like, if I take, like I just said, the 420, 840 cycles, and I sound those tones in succession or in parallel, that produces a positive feeling, a feeling of like conclusion, or I don't know exactly how to describe it, because I don't think in those type of terms, but it's like, it has a feeling of completeness to it. But then if I sound a tone of 420 cycles next to one of 490 cycles, it sounds horrid, and it doesn't make you feel good, and you want to turn it off.
Yeah. We got a question in the chat room. They want to know about the chord D minor. I don't know if there's any principles behind that.
That's one that Bach seemed to favor a lot. Its relative is the F major. D minor really gets you into some deep worlds. And Bach chose that key for most of his very serious organ works, including his final work, which he died before he could complete, which is almost 3 hours long. And then F major, which is basically the same thing but shifted in phase by a third, is a very golden, sunshiny, warm type of sound. But D minor is kind of murky.
Yeah, a little bit darker.
Kind of violet-colored. It's funny how all these keys, even though the intervals are pretty much the same, they all have different effects.
Yeah. And I've noticed it too. There's actually different bands who will play in these different chords and they will write lyrics that are fashioned around those feelings that are conjured. And when they do videos or wear clothing, they'll wear the colors and stuff that are associated with that, and they're taking it to a next level. Yeah,
that's totally conceivable.
Well, let me ask you
these are things that I was in my early college days. These things, I was working on extensively. Adapting music into networks and oscilloscope displays and analyzers and developing like a television that would portray these things. But this day and age, I don't have all that equipment, and I just lost my main facility about 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know how to get back on track with this again. It's something I'm very interested in. I want to pursue on it, but right now I don't know how to return to that level. Now, what I am working on now, and it's a part of a government project here that is basically been provided to me by the government, is the Earth also generates a lot of its own frequencies and tones.
Yeah, I know they claimed that they was able to record some of those tones as well.
Yeah, well, the most... Probably the best example that's immediately available to the public is there's a person named Steve McGreevy, and he has a website on the Aurora Chorus and Aurora Sounds, and he spent damn near a decade during optimum circumstances of bringing magnetic loops into Canada and intercepting the electromagnetic fields of the Aurora, and it's on the internet. You can find these sounds. And there's some of these recordings. I mean, I've heard these things, and I about fell out of my chair. You can't tell the difference between the sounds of the Aurora and the sounds of the deep sea animals. They make the same types of noises.
Yeah, and that principle, if I'm correct, is the same principle with the Om tone. Whenever those who are of the Buddhist or Hindu tradition, whenever they would sit in a circle and chant Om, it's supposedly the sound of the song of the sun emanating that sound, and they get on one harmony with that.
Yeah, you could hit a harmonic, the aurora tones, and for me, I'm into the telluric stuff that the earthquakes and volcanoes and hurricanes and those kind of things generate. That's the bulk of my research, and that's what my project is right now. Also produces a lot of interesting, at the beginning, the onset before the main seismic event. I've heard recordings that other people have taken of what sounds like giant Tibetan gongs. My equipment picked up like screaming sounds and yips, and there's all these frequencies, but the wavelengths are so long and the velocities are so high on this type of stuff that we only exist in a very higher harmonic of these frequencies and wavelengths, which could be, half the size of the solar system, or have a frequency of one cycle every 28 days. These are extremely low-pitched, long wavelengths, and these things are permeating through the atmosphere all the time. I have an extremely sensitive altimeter barometer instrument in my car, that we use on the fighter jets that will measure elevation down to just a couple of feet. And I can park somewhere and watch that thing as it slowly goes down, and then it slowly goes up, and then it slowly goes down as these waves go through. And when you look up in the sky, you'll see all these patterns in the clouds. And those are sound waves, extremely low frequency sound waves.
So that would almost be similar to the rain dances of the Native Americans, correct? What they were trying to tap into?
Possible. I'm not certain on that.
Mm-hmm. I want to go out on a limb here, but this is just something I want to ask you. You referred to these different tones and vibrations as whenever you play them, you're able to see them make a shape. I've seen different videos where they play tones and they make different shapes, different perfect geometrical patterns, and whenever the tone is a pure tone or a nice tone or a perfect tone, and then other ones when they play something like a cymbal or a crash or something like that, the symbol turns into, or the shape turns into something that looks like mass confusion.
Right.
And whenever you referred to them a while ago, you called them entities. Is on a very spiritual level, when you talked about the church was actually in on this as well, and they studied this and performed this as well. Are these entities, or are these sounds and tones, are they living entities? Are they living beings?
Well, they start to become, like an organism.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had these things on the CRT display, it did cause certain people to become terrified when they saw it. That weren't, familiar with, large scale, military type, radar, CRT rooms and all that stuff where there's all kinds of stuff going on. That was already intimidating enough to begin with, with the line of the DC to DC converters and the Snell transformer. And then here's this green thing, dancing around and pulsating like an amoeba on one of the CRTs, to the Bach organ music or the Handel chorus, and it really frightens people.
Yeah.
It really looks like it's alive.
I would wonder.
The most intense images that I got on this system was from the works of Georg Friedrich Handel, who was the last composer of this music.
Mm-hmm. I would wonder if these energies, these tones, always exist, and whenever you play the tones, whenever you play them, or you get on the same vibrational pattern as they are, then you almost bring them into this reality, or you get to see them, you get to hear them, you get to feel them. Like they're always there. I don't think that you're playing it and creating an entity. Maybe that it's always there, and when you play the tone, you get to experience it.
That's conceivable, but that doesn't correspond with the electrical induction theory of it.
Okay, so all that has to be created and generated?
The induction theory, Faraday, which seems to be how this stuff works, is empty space is filled with a primordial medium, which is in electrical work was referred to as the ether.
Mm-hmm.
The ether. I gave anyone that's interested in this subject is I presented a lecture on this last June, and there's a book also that goes with it called The Four-Quadrant Representation of Electricity. And my mind was keener on the subject then than now, so if you can get a copy of that video, I'll get into how the ether is affected by the archetypes and the formative forces. The ether is kind of at the end of the line, and the archetype is what's in the Pythagorean ratios. The archetype is what modulates space. Now, the space, the ether, is a bunch of little like tubes or lines that are all kind of mashed in every which direction, and they all equalize each other out. There is no entity. But when a formative force is applied to the ether, then one set of lines will point one way, and one set of lines will point the other way, and then you'll start to get the polarization. And then this confused mass of spaghetti in a big blob made out of the ether all of a sudden forms into a physical shape, which could be you or me or a garbage can or a cloud in the sky or things that we can't see, like musical entities in the air.
Mm-hmm.
That's the basic theory. Now, I could be wrong on that, but this is the theory that I've been, using and is going to be an upcoming topic in my next presentation, because until I describe how the ether and electricity works, there's no way that I can explain to somebody how radio and Tesla's transmission and all that type of stuff works.
Yeah, well, I told you I was kind of stepping out there. I mean, I see a picture of it, but explaining it in trying to, I think it's going to have the same effects either way, because I believe that the same principles apply, whether they were there the whole time or you're creating them or whatever. And I kind of like to tie it into, there's two different stories. One is the story of Pythagoras. It was recorded, it was said that he was coming home from a exhibit or something like that, and there was a drunk man. He was walking down the street, and the story says that the drunk man was harassing a homosexual at the time. And he didn't like him. He was riled up trying to fight him. He was trying to kick down his door and get in his house because he wanted to do harm to him. And supposedly Pythagoras looked, and on the corner there was a man playing a flute. And the rhythm and the notes that he was playing was real aggressive. The story says that Pythagoras asked him to play a softer, more sweeter, upbeat melody. And whenever the man changed his melody, that the whole countenance of the man who was violent trying to attack the other man totally changed as soon as the music changed, and the man gathered himself and went about his way.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically the whole theory behind the church modes, which was the formalization of the Pythagoras music during the Middle Ages. Is, there were books written on this back then describing how one particular mode would, make people behave one way, and another particular mode would make people behave another way. And of course, that's how this stuff is used against us in the media to get us to, eat things that we don't want to eat and do things that we don't normally want to do.
Colors, shapes, sounds, all of it. Jingles.
Oh, yeah, the ratios work the same way with colors. That's why, the colors in a televised media image are always very specific to what's going on. There's a whole engineering behind all this stuff that adapts from decade to decade.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
So once you put your face up to that CRT, your reality, your polarization, just like the ether, is being modulated by the color proportions. Well, you have no control over it. Some people are more sensitive than others in that they can be cognizant of it. Other people are not aware. So to me, I'm so sensitive of it. Just the color of the ground of an area that I'm living in has a profound influence on me. In some places, I just can't stay for more than a couple of hours.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I kind of tie that story in with me in the scriptures, how King Saul had a evil spirit tormenting him, and David went up to him with the harp and began to play this music. And the only time that this evil spirit would subside was when David played his harp and played these songs or chords or whatever.
Well, that makes sense.
I kind of tied the two stories together, just understanding the power of music. Not that it's just...
Well, the power of music, I think is really expressed well in how the walls of Jericho fell down.
Exactly. I was going to ask you about that as well.
Yeah. So, the thing that I came to understand or believe in my course of all this investigation, I'll make reference to the book that really reawakened me to this, because this is all stuff I did in my college years and, at RCA and all that. And later on, I became interested in different things. But I have like a book exchange thing goes on with a friend of mine, and this is what leads to my writings on the internet, which are now up to about 1,000 pages. He brings in these books on these type of subjects and then wants me to read them and then explain to him what's going on that he doesn't understand. So he brought me a book, and I really recommend that everybody read this book. It's called Music of the Spheres by a man named Jameson.
And that's a term that Pythagoras coined, correct?
What's that now? Well, that was the whole philosophy. I don't know who coined it, but that was the philosophy. So in going through this and getting, I have a different way of receiving information than normal people do. I get things like in chunks and images, and I do not learn in a serial fashion. So in going through this book, it started to reawaken a lot of things that I had come to understand when I was actually studying this stuff in college and doing experiments in relation with RCA at the time. But there's something that has been attenuated in the human race over the millennia, and we have been told stories about the walls of Jericho coming down, and we've been told stories, through the mythology, about people throwing seeds on the ground and skeletons dancing out of the seeds and attacking people and all this stuff happening, is I believe with the simple ratios and symbologies that people had back in that time, that those things are not just stories.
Mm-hmm.
But there was enough voodoo in all this that just the simple means they had of producing ratios at the right time, at the right place, and the right proportion to cause materialization and dematerialization. And over the millennia, particularly with the advent of the modern age, that's been erased. But that potential still exists.
Yes.
And in the modern day standpoint, now this is what causes a very serious complication, is then we have the weapons potential of Pythagoras. So all the guns in the world, and all the bombs in the world, and all the force in the world, theoretically, can be brought to a standstill by simple geometric proportions. Which is kind of a frightening concept.
Would you, I'm not sure if it's the same thing, but would you liken that to what they call feng shui, the settings up of cities and houses and things like that to produce a certain energy?
You mean like a sacred geometry?
Yeah, well, they have some of the Chinese actually will set their house up as far as their chairs, their living room set and everything to produce this pattern of where energy can flow and create a tone. And I've also heard it said that their cities were set up in this fashion as well.
Well, these things were part of normal engineering in antiquity.
Okay, exactly.
They've just become, with modernistic materialism, they've just become erased from the textbooks. Just like most of the knowledge of electricity has been erased from the textbooks. Electricity is very parallel to all this, and it irritates the same people, and they in turn make sure that the understanding of that is either destroyed or eliminated.
But they still have the information, the lay people.
Well, they're offended by it. So what they want to do is they just want to kill it. So, it could be the most powerful government in the world, or, whatever, or the richest, most effective dictator, or whatever. They can't avail themselves of this stuff because it's antagonistic to their very being. So all they want to do is suppress it. It is not available to them. So that is kind of like a protective measure. So the Einsteiner will, fight blue until he's blue in the face. None of this stuff is possible. And, you can actually cause one of them to go into violent convulsions by pushing the issue and, and logically and experimentally proving it. And they will not accept the information. They will just become more and more violently opposed to it, until there's some kind of short circuit occurs, and it's mutually exclusive.
Would you liken this whole conversation, what we're having, could this be the reason behind a lot of different energies and different mental experiences that people are having, the type of music and the type of sounds that they're around, the type of colors and other people that they're around? Could this affect someone's mind in their daily life? Do you believe that this could be going on as well?
Well, yeah, it all has a subconscious effect whether you want to believe it or not. And like I say, as far as, the advertisement world goes and the world of mind control, it is being engineered.
Exactly. I believe it as well.
But on a higher level, these people don't have that. They don't have access to that because of their own denials.
Okay.
But I can't speak in absolute knowledge of anything because, I only exist in my world, but this is the way that I view it, and this is the experience I've had. But that's not to say, there isn't some fluorescent lamp-lit bunker somewhere, underneath George Bush's house where this stuff's all being connived to a level that would just scare the hell out of us.
Yeah. Oh, I think it will. I think it would. I think whenever we begin to get some of the, just some of the crumbs of what's going on, it scares the hell out of us. But if we really understood the power and the magnetism behind a commercial, a simple commercial, if we really understood the science and what the commercial and the colors and the sounds are invoking within our own being, that music and that colors, and when we see those billboards, I think if the lay person who don't understand anything, when they come to an understanding of that, it would scare the hell out of them.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, there's an even deeper level because it's been asserted that, these particular species that I just referred to in their bunkers, and there's good evidence of this all around in the architecture of the things that, the instruments and vehicles and whatever that are created for us, is there's a deliberate attempt to create some kind of demonic entity and to bring it into an actual physical being.
Yeah, well, that's why I was asking you.
We're at the threshold now. It's a satanic female horned entity. You can see its face in virtually all the architecture if you're sensitive to it. Most people, of course, are blind on the conscious level, but in engaging these archetypes is each person is becoming like a cell and like a large jellyfish of this spiritual entity.
Mm-hmm.
And
you have
some of the music that I've referred to is actually toxic to these people and can be used similar to the life beam tube for eradicating cancer cells. Is this music can actually, as you pointed out in some of the earlier examples, can be actually used to disrupt the archetype of this thing and cause it to dissolve, in my theory.
So almost like the control and the negativity and all that is almost like the lifeblood of this thing.
Yeah, it's there's an organism in marine biology. There's a group of organisms that are referred to as hydrozoans, and they're a scientific mystery. Well, the jellyfish is an example of one. The jellyfish consists of a very large quantity of individual cells. But there's something different about the jellyfish and those hydrozoan-type animals that you don't encounter in the higher order animals. Is there's no veins, there's no arteries, there's no nerves, there's no central nervous system, there's no brain, there's no heart, there's no lungs. Each and every cell respirates and exists independent, yet the entire organism moves as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the situation that we're dealing with.
I want to open up the phone lines for anybody who has questions and you want to talk to Eric Dollard. You can call. The number is 724-444-7444. You can enter the call ID as 78643-pound. Those in the chat room, it's going to be listed at the bottom. If you have a question, you can call in now. I'm thinking on a microscopic level, well, I don't want to say microscopic, on the level of which we see things right now, we can't see that entity, but if you was to back up and look at maybe the earth or the different nations from above, you could see this entity operating over nations, I believe because I actually read the Holy Bible and read the scriptures, and there's actually these entities which are referred to as principalities in the Bible, and it says that we don't war against flesh and blood, which is these carnal things that we can touch, taste, see, and hear. We don't do war against that, but it is a spiritual battle, and we wrestle with these powers that we can't see on a day-to-day basis, but they're there, they're operating, they're more real than you and me. And there's a story in the book of Daniel where the angel Michael was traveling back and forth between earth and heaven, bringing forth prayers and information and things like that. He actually withstood one of these principalities, and in the scriptures it calls it the Prince of Persia. And this is not talking about a literal prince, it's talking about a principality, a power that is ruling and governing over this set of land. And I believe that that these entities, these principalities, are controlling a lot of people. They're controlling the vibration, they're controlling the information that gets out and all that. And I'm kind of tying this into what you're saying because it's making perfect sense to me. Would you agree with you talking about these entities and these different negative beings that are being summoned by the higher-ups or those who are in control? Is it very similar to what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a distinct possibility.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be that, a group of people are creating this thing. It could be, this thing is controlling a group of people.
Either or.
There's no way to tell which way the power flows.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's all too nebulous.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely there. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It's becoming quite organized and coherent, and it manifests itself through architecture. Because basically architecture allows you to get into a time machine or whatever and go back and actually experience through the archetype who the people were that made it.
Mm-hmm.
So every era, every culture, all has its archetype. So, the education system as it is, or was, you get a lot of exposure to different things at an early age, and this is Egyptians, and these are, Russians, and all that is, when you see something made by the Egyptians, or you see something, made by the Russians, it's immediately identifiable. Oh, that's definitely Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
It's not South Africa. It's not Germany. It's not Persia. It's Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
It stands out. I mean, I've been able to do this myself. In my capacity as an electrical engineer, when I started learning this stuff, just after infancy. The school system. I didn't let the school system take this vision away from me. Is when I would see like insulators or circuit breakers or things that I was learning about or working with, is I actually saw the people that made them.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Dr. Emoto's rice experiment?
No.
Okay. If you look it up online, you can just type in rice experiment or Dr. Emoto rice experiment. And it was in a documentary that came out entitled Water, the Great Mystery. What he did, and he was showing the different vibrations and the sacred geometry that was formed in water. You can look this up on YouTube.
Oh, yeah. Somebody showed me that. And the water started making all these patterns and forms.
Yeah. And then what he did with the rice was he took 3 different beakers, and he filled them halfway with rice. He put water in each one. He labeled each one. The one on the far left, he said thank you to it every morning, and he spoke blessings upon it. Thank you, I love you, things of that nature. The one in the middle, he ignored, didn't say a word to. The one on the far right, he said, I hate you, you fool, every day for so many days. And at the end of so many days, I forget if it was a month or what, at the end of this period, the one that he said, I love you to, looked exactly the same as when he put the rice and the water in there. It looks exactly the same. You can almost eat it. And the one that he said, I hate you to, every day, it began to mold. And the whole jar was full of disgusting, nasty-looking mold. And you actually have a lot of people who are doing this experiment for themselves, and they're filming it and putting it on YouTube. I wanted to not just repeat the information. This was an easy experiment that anyone can do. So I started doing this experiment myself 13 days into the experiment, and I testified that it is working, that these words and frequencies and tones have power. When you speak a blessing, when you speak positive words and affirmations over things, you're changing the DNA makeup. When you understand that your body is made out of water, your body is, 70% water?
Something like that.
So whenever you're speaking blessings or curses to people, you're affecting them. So this is an experiment that anybody can do. And whenever I get done, I'm going to film mine and put it on YouTube as well. So everybody who's subscribed to my channel, you'll actually be able to see that as well when I'm done. So I'm 13 days into it. It is working. So I think it's pretty amazing, and it speaks volumes about the different topics that we're speaking about today.
Yeah, and it serves as an experimental verification that we're not just making this stuff up or imagining it.
Exactly. And you can see everybody's video. I mean, it's working. The majority of the videos, they're working, and they're showing you day-by-day progression.
One experiment similar to that was done with, freezing water and then observing the crystals that would form in the patterns, like the snowflakes and what have you, or frost forming on the glass. It was the same effect. It almost was like a television into the archetypes of the sounds and energies that were stimulating the water as it was freezing.
Yeah.
So water has that unique property of possessing all kinds of inductivities, of course, electrical being one of them, but many other types of inductivities too, and can polarize into thousands of different forms.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. We have a question in the chat room. They want to know some information and how this conversation can relate to the Coral Castle with...
That I can't directly connect. I don't know a lot about that.
Okay, well, they're just saying that that tones and sounds were used to actually levitate objects. A lot of people believe that that's how the pyramid was built. Through these different tones and sounds, they're able to move and lift objects and things like that. Much like what happened with the walls of Jericho, how there was a sound that came forth and the walls collapsed. I
actually had an occurrence of that with my space stereo system.
Mm-hmm.
So the space stereo system, this is something that I picked up from RCA a long time ago, but the laboratory that I built for equipment was this Earth stereo thing I'm talking about, where you have a radio station broadcasting in some part of the Earth, and then the signal bounces around in the Earth ionosphere space and echoes and all that. It produces a type of stereo that's a little different than the stereo you get out of a normal recording.
Mm-hmm.
There's an extra phase component added, and what happens is, and this is what really struck me in the laboratory back in the RCA days, is the sound would leave the plane of the speakers of the teletype signal or Morse code or broadcast station or whatever it was that I had tuned in this stereo system with two antennas at right angles to each other, like giant microphones pointing to different parts of the Earth. The sound actually had a presence in the room. You could reach out and touch it.
Hmm.
And if with music, it's like, the instruments would separate themselves and float around in the room depending upon how the ionosphere was pulsating. The speakers weren't even part of the experience anymore, nor the space between them like normal stereo.
Mm-hmm.
So what I had built was, again, at my research facility in the Mojave Desert, I reconstructed one of these. It took about 10 years to put all this stuff together again because I lost all the original equipment. And there's a station in China which broadcasts a radio up to date that is specifically used to jam another radio station.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do is they play 1 hour of Chinese classical music, on a 500,000 watt transmitter on top of somebody's frequency somewhere that they don't like. So with my antenna system, I can pretty much separate the directions and focus on the Chinese station, and the music was just completely out of this world. It was fantastic.
Mm.
So I would have, my big speakers and my power amp all rolling away with this thing, like a rock concert level in the equipment room, having a good time experiencing it and watching it on my oscilloscopes and stuff. And I happened to have a small headlamp that was laying on the desk that I used as a ballast for battery charging. And there was an interval in the propagation of the music from China to here, and the waveform of the music itself is the headlight jumped 6 inches in the air off the desk.
Mm.
I saw this with my own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So what I started doing then was sitting at that spot in between the speakers.
Yeah.
And it really does something to your body. I think it can actually heal the body if you use the right kind of music.
With every fact that you have, whether it can do damage, I think for that to be true, the polar opposite has to be true as well, that if it can do damage, it can also be used for healing.
Well, originally that's kind of what this was all about.
Mm-hmm.
The church was a place to go in, and if the plants were lined up right and everything was, appropriate, the atmospheric polarizations or whatever, you went into that and you were recharged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But today's society has taken all of these fundamentals and principles and turned them around into destructive and, degrading means to make people sick and helpless.
Yeah. Yeah. Make you passive or make you... I think they give you just enough to keep you coming back, Like they give you just enough healing or to make you reverence them and think that they have some type of power or some type of ability to be in touch with God, instead of letting the lay people know that they can do this as well,
Well, that was the downfall of the church, and that's why, Martin Luther had to come about and yank this out of their hands and set things straight again. But, that lasted up to the time of Bach, but then the age of Romanticism, came in and destroyed everything, including the organs. They tore all the tracker mechanisms out and used telegraph relays instead and the whole thing, and just debased the whole thing. The concept of God, as conceived from the day of Pythagoras and all that, just completely vanished. Mm-hmm. And then by 1900, it was just turned to trash, complete trash. Well, fortunately, there was a revival in the 60s, particularly around San Francisco, and then, of course, the Beatles and a few other, British groups had brought music back, started to bring it back to that level, and it became very popular, but then it just, after 1970, it took the big slide until this stuff now it's not, I wouldn't even call it music.
Mm-hmm.
The names I have for it probably would offend everybody, so I won't use them.
All right. Well, we got some of these people waiting on the line. They want to call in, but I want to tie that into with the sound and the vibration, being able to change physical matters when you have like a glass, and they've done experiments where you can turn the sound to a certain volume at a certain frequency, and the glass cup will actually break. That right there is an experiment. If you can't do it yourself, if you can't reach those pitches, I mean, there's videos where you can actually watch that happening. So. All right, we're going to take our first caller, and if anybody was on the line waiting, we'll go ahead and call in now. We'll take your call. So this call is coming from British Columbia.
Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
Hello. Hey, it's easy. Hey, man,
what's up, man? I'm good, brother. You have a question?
Really engrossed in your subject today, man. It's really nice. I'm just meditating on it. It's beautiful. I can hear my chakras ringing. Hey, what I wanted to say today, I don't know. I don't have much of a question, I guess, but I just know the Bible is, it's all about the Word of God,
Mm-hmm.
The word, well, that's that. That's the Word. It'll always be the Word. The Word is there.
Mm-hmm.
But,
word vibration. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, vibration is sound, right? Vibration is sound. Can you think of something that vibrates in the world? Everything? Maybe space, the abysmal, the abyss from whence God brought forth the world of creation, right? The substance. So, I guess what I try to say, I've been working hard on my music. It's beautiful. And the monks were meditated. They have the double vocal cord, so the ratio thing makes sense too. Because when you harmonize your double vocal cord, it makes that Fibonacci scale or whatever it's called. But I don't know. The music is beautiful, man. Love music. And
Yeah.
I just need some guidance right now, man. Because I'm trying to find it, but I had so much I want to say.
I hear you, man. There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of to be said, and I think in this same aspect, we've touched on a lot of different topics so far, and we're cramming them all into this one interview. And all of these little topics that we're touching on, you could go into a lot of detail, and that's what Eric does. If you look up his work, find him online. There's tons of YouTube videos of different interviews with him where he goes into a lot more detail in some of these vague questions that I've been asking him today. So you can definitely check out his work there, man.
Energy is vibration, right? Energy is vibration. Vibration is sound. Music is energy. Everything is interconnected. It's all sound. The sun is a sound. The stars sing. The stars feel like a drum. They're not just sitting there shining. They go boom, boom. But sometimes they make terrible noise, like you say, too, so the music might not sound that good today. So the most powerful thing in the world is our sound, and sound resonates from the mouth, to quote the cannabis. It's all about Jesus at the center of a snowflake. You'll find the Star of David every time.
Mm-hmm.
Every time.
Yeah.
So
Eric, what can you tell us about the what is known as the Merkaba or the Star of David in sacred geometry? Do you know anything about that?
Not right off.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of, like what he was saying with the snowflakes and things like that. They're actually finding this Star of David, this hexagon, this six-pointed star in the middle of these different snowflakes and different. Whenever something's vibrating or something's spinning, supposedly you get that shape, the six-pointed star or the Merkaba with it actually spinning.
Yeah, well, in the case of the snowflake, that's the archetype that the water crystallizes on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all going to be based on those angles. The entirety of the snowflake is somehow going to be derived from that archetypal angle, the seed angle in the middle, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly familiar with all that, but as far as log periodic antenna design goes, and the Rudolf Steiner concept of the growth of plants, there has to be the seed archetype that exists one step right out of what is being created.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything progresses from that point.
You have there's a movement now that a lot of people are doing, and they're taking a vow and they're not listening to anything unless it's tuned to the 432 hertz frequency. They're saying that this music sounds better and it affects you differently, and that the pitch...
Well, you're talking about 432 cycles versus the standard 440 cycles?
Exactly.
Well, then that brings us right to back to the Pythagorean thing, because the 256 cycles is the 256 is a very important Pythagorean number, and the C should be 256.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other tone should derive from that. Now, the 432 might be that. I'd have to calculate it right off to see.
Okay, so you're saying...
The 440 is not right.
The 256?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the Pythagorean progressions are based on certain multiples and powers, and 256 and 512 are part of that series.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's the same thing with the lengths of the organ pipe. You have the 32 foot, then the next octave you have the 16 foot. See, in all of these, if you start making these things different sizes, from the pure proportionality standpoint, it doesn't seem to make sense because the ratios are all the same with respect to each other, but from the Pythagorean standpoint, we're trying to tune on to this carrier frequency, if you use a radio term that exists.
Mm-hmm.
The suppressed carrier frequency that is behind everything, like in single sideband, where modulation is going to sound all distorted or be beyond the range of human hearing until you reinsert the carrier signal that derived it, and then all of a sudden the speech comes out as audio perfectly crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the reason for landing on 256, because that is like a natural carrier or reference frequency for this whole system of music as we're talking about it, not as it's thought of by physicists.
Mm-hmm.
That's my theory, anyway.
Okay. Well, yeah, I've definitely did the experiment myself as far as you have a lot of people who will download music or upload music from some of today's popular artists, and they will change the tuning from its original tuning to 432, and it just makes you feel better. I mean, you can actually feel the difference in it. Even if it's some music that's dark, even with the lyrical content, when it's tuned to that higher frequency, it just feels better. You can actually feel it. I think it's pretty interesting.
Well, the same situation actually exists with the chords, too, is because of the equal temperament, is all the ratios have been distorted to make it fit into a series of octaves.
Mm-hmm.
And that basically destroys the pattern that the musical interval generates.
Yeah.
So the problem is, if you stay in one key, then you don't have to deal with that. But if you start getting into the heavy polyphonic music like Bach, well, then it doesn't work anymore, and you have to go equal temperament. But when you use equal temperament, is the finer points of the music and the heavy consonant resonances all disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Well, something I noticed with this CRT display I was talking about that I used to turn music into images, there's something about the chorus and a combination of human voices that can produce waveforms at absolutely massive power levels.
Uh-huh.
And it's one of the complications that makes this music virtually impossible to digitize. Well, the type of music we're talking about really defies being digitized.
Okay. Can you do that with song on the radio? Could you put it through this program and get an image of it?
Yeah, it's all it is basically is an oscilloscope that has a network between it and whatever's producing the music. It has to be stereo.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it goes through this network, it creates what appears to be for the lack of a better term, three-dimensional. There's a lot of reasons why not to use the term three-dimensional and two-dimensional, but that's a whole other subject. But it's referred to as three-dimensional. The proper word for it appears on the television screen to have volume. In other words, presence in a volumetric form, even though it's the so-called two-dimensional on the screen. But the way the video is fed into the signal, it gives it form, and these choruses will all of a sudden just light the screen up with this big, circle shape or whatever, and overload the amplifier, even though it's just 5 people singing. And this very early church mode music, you can find recordings of it. One of the most foremost composers is a person named Thomas Tallis. If you can find his music, it's representative of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Because in the human voice, there is no equal temperament. Because we can scale or move our voice continuously. There's no quantified or quantum steps like there is on a keyboard or when you're using some instrument that has keys or levels on it. And these choruses back then had a way of these performers could phase synchronize their voices and cause all the harmonics to add in such a way that the peak amplitude could be thousands of times higher than the average amplitude of the signal. This is one of the things that the pipe organ in the church can do too. It can take a succession of harmonics and manipulate them through the propagation delay in the church and the distances between the organ in the back of the church and organ in the front of the church to produce these harmonic standing waves. And there can be high pressure zones and low pressure zones in the church that are so intense during these concerts. If the polarization is proper with the planets and what have you, you can actually feel them, those physical entities moving through your body.
Yeah.
They're definitely solid objects, kind of like one of those, popular pictures of the atom, with all the little balls with the straws sticking them together in a cube or some kind of thing. This thing forms in the space, and you can feel it moving through your body. So it's theoretically, with 5 or 6 octaves of pipes, you can produce transient waves that have thousands of times the power of their average value. But they last for very short periods of time, but they occur in succession. This is one of the things that Nikola Tesla utilized in his developing his electrical fields for his physics experiments and his wireless power transmission. We're not dealing with sine waves in a situation like that all the time, but we're dealing with these odd harmonic waves that situation can be at rest for a substantial portion of the cycle, and then all of a sudden at 0 degrees or 180 degrees, for all the harmonics all of a sudden all add up into a giant peak, and then it goes away in a fraction of a microsecond, and then the rest of the cycle is dead. Even though that cycle is filled with 100 harmonics that have a definite amplitude, during that cyclic interval, when they are put all together, they completely cancel each other out until that one instant, and then they add into a massive quantity, and then they disappear again. So it's kind of a fascinating experimental thing in electricity to get these waveforms that this produces, and this is part of how the church and organ music system works.
Yeah. Well, let me run this by you. You mentioned the body vibrating and feeling things moving through your body, doing different things, and you use the word entities as well. Whenever you mention this, my mind, being a spiritual person, goes straight to the Kundalini awakening experience and feeling or baptism of the Holy Spirit experience, where they literally start vibrating. They literally begin to sweat, they begin to cry, have a joyous feeling, and feel like all the negative things they've done in their life, all the negative baggages that they've been experiencing are just erased after having this one experience, whether their whole body begins to literally vibrate very fast. Is there any way we can link this together, or there's like a scientific method behind this, or is this something that's just a spiritual experience?
Well, it kind of gets hard to say. I mean, I can understand it on a musical level, but on that level, the ether theory and the electrical principles don't carry through that well.
Well, because I know this, you were saying that you're able to feel these, with sound. And I know that it's not always sound being involved when these experiences happen. A lot of times there is, and then their body begins to actually vibrate, and they feel a power and energy going through different parts of their body, doing something, cleaning them or something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's totally understandable. Is all these experiences in your life, cause physical polarizations in your body that are permanent.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that we'll have Mike discussed in his, analysis of what it was that was making people sick and crazy and causes of cancer and all these type of things. And it was because of these collected forms or situations in your body because of all these negative experiences, and then that basically starts to exclude the life energy, and then that part of your body can degenerate and turn into disease. But it originates in the thought pattern forming these archetypes in your body. But from the electromechanical standpoint, from what we've just been talking about, and the experiments I've been doing and the things that you've made mention of, it's music as a means to erase these things.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you take a magnet and wave it over, a piece of recording tape, and the information on it's gone.
Yeah, this and I think it's tying in with everything we're talking about. And someone has a question, and I think you might have answered it as well, talking about any insight relating to frequencies that kill viruses. And I think this is the same thing we're talking about right now, whether it's this, negative or harmful things in your body that you may be able to find healing from.
Well, this was actually developed and engineered by a medical doctor named Royal Rife.
Mm-hmm.
And today all that information is all distorted and turned into something that has no relation to his work, which is typical, just like with Tesla and everybody else. So whatever you hear with the name Rife on it is most likely to have no relation. But what Rife did, and I physically, held these apparatus in my hands, so I know the principles of operation, is he adapted a Tesla X-ray tube connected to a Tesla transformer, and then the Tesla transformer was excited by a small AM radio transmitter, and that would produce the Tesla beam that would penetrate the body and electrostatically cause mechanical actions on the viruses and things inside the body on a very minute level. So what he did is he took an assemblage of musical chords and had developed a microscope that the Einsteiners say is impossible, but he made it work anyway, and he could see things smaller than anybody could see. So he could see and not kill them with electrons or any of that type of stuff. So he studied the pathogens, the viruses and what have you, and then he beamed them with the Tesla tube, and then would put musical chords or similar multi-frequency relationships into the AM transmitter, and then manipulate those frequencies until the virus started to react, and then that would help him tune in, and then the virus would be, when the right chord was reached, the virus would be completely destroyed. So he came up with a frequency log to figure this out, and he started eradicating cancer with it. So in response, the American Medical Association was formed under the direction of Morris Fishbein, and they destroyed the life of Dr. Rife.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see why.
This is where the American Medical Association finds its origin in this specific engineering occurrence.
Yeah. Well, and that's one thing that you're going to have to forfeit. You're going to have to, be willing to be ridiculed. Anybody who has any type of new information or trying to actually revive old information at that, you're going to have to be willing to be ridiculed and demonized by the rest of your peers. So.
And even if, like me, you manage to pull out of that and not have any peers, or, disappear into some secret government laboratory, or just do it all out in the bushes, what is very evident right now on the Internet is there's a massive defamation campaign to make me look like a monkey and all this stuff and that stuff, because it was not successful to stop me by the other methods. So now it just turns into a wholesale defamation. This group calls themselves Ether Force, exists specifically to debase my work and keep people on a false path. It's kind of nice stuff to look at something like that, but that's just the way it is in this business, as you explained.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, welcome to the walk of Jesus. You know what I'm saying? It was the same thing with him. Someone who brought forth light and understanding and grace and peace into the world was accused of being a idolater and one who consulted with demons and followed Satan, by his peers. So
by the people that did that very thing.
Same people he was trying to help. Those who were consulting with Satan,
So I in a certain sense, this defamation and all this stuff, because I don't avail myself to the internet. I live in the bushes. Mm-hmm. I'm a feral human. Mm-hmm. So I write stuff and I drop it, in the post office, and it disappears out of my sight and it appears on the internet. But as I become a personality or whatever on the internet, initially, and it's still, the situation, well, sure enough, this negative forces come about, and it's attempting to be very disruptive. It could turn out to be deadly. Mm-hmm. It brings me back to the notions of John Lennon and what happened to him.
Yeah. He's just one of many. I mean,
but in my case, I think John Lennon really is a comparative example, and that's what I'm worried about. Mm-hmm. Because I'm doing a kindred type of operation. Mm-hmm. I'm making this popular. People are really getting into this. They're into it already. It's just that I have this ability to quantify certain things that, particularly in electrical work, that, makes things much more apparent. You can actually build equipment out of it. Mm-hmm. So that gets people more excited. It creates more of a movement of what's going on, even though that's not really my aim in life. But that's what's happening, and that's what people want, and, it does buy gas for the car and food and all that, beyond my Social Security. But then, somebody's going to take me out.
Well, I think you're doing a justice to the human race. I think that you have everyone's best interest in mind. I don't think that you're in it for greed. I don't think that you're in it. I think that you're in it for the science, and that you're in it for understanding that you are a free man, and that all human beings are free men to experience life and to the abundance and the best life that they can, and to let them know what's going on. And these different things are happening. Different sciences do exist, and you're giving us the breakdown on it and the deep inner workings of it. And the work that you're doing goes far beyond the topics on this show. I kind of approach things as more of from a spiritual standpoint, and you're actually breaking down the science of everything that I believe. You're breaking down the science of the Christian faith. You're breaking down the science of the Hindus, the Buddhists, Islam, all those who understand that a world exists beyond this mundane things that we can touch, and it is a world of electromagnetic frequencies, called different names in different holy books, things like that can be tapped into. They are being tapped into now. So I'm going to put your work out there. I'm going to share your work with my fans, my listeners, and so there was a lot of people who were wanting to tune into this show. I put the show out there that we was going to do it, and we have a lot of people listening live, a lot of people who are going to go back on YouTube and listen to the show again. So it's there, and I think that there's an innocence there as far as you not trying to push your work, or you're not trying to propagate your work. You're simply sharing your work. You're putting it out there, and those individuals who want the higher understanding of it, who want to know how it works and operates, they're going to find you. They're going to Google your name. They're going to Google topics that relate to it, and they're going to find you, just like I found you. And that's just how this cycle is working. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for putting your neck out there. I speak blessings over you just like I speak it over that water, and that everything will line up perfectly with your will, and your destiny will come forth, and you won't be taken out, that you will be protected. And I believe in what you're doing. So with that being said, we got another call. See if we got a question here. Caller, you're on there.
Hello.
What's up?
Hey, how's it going? I was just, I've been following Eric's work for quite a while now, and researching other people's works. I've come across Marco Rodin's vortex-based mathematics, and on the website here, it says one of the things you can learn through it is that the torus skin models harmonic cascadance, and I noticed in Tesla's magnifying transmitter that there's actually a torus almost antenna at the top. I was wondering if Eric had any thoughts on that connection between the torus and transmission.
Well, the terminal on the Tesla transformer is a reflector. It doesn't actually transmit. It sends the electricity back down where it's accelerated and forced into the earth.
Okay.
And the reason why it has that mushroom shape, it has to have that mushroom cap type of shape, because that way the electrical forces are directed in such a way that the material around the high potential point doesn't break down and catch on fire. And that particular shape causes the electrification to neutralize itself underneath the cap of the mushroom so that the mass doesn't catch on fire.
Okay. I was actually thinking the resonance of the Earth was actually transmitted out through that. I had it completely backwards.
Yeah, that's backwards has been deliberately introduced, and unfortunately, the concept cannot be corrected. So no one will ever really grasp Tesla's toroid transmission system because the physicists have fixated the idea of an antenna. There is no such thing. Tesla states that even in his own writings, but he did intend to try to tap the electric field around that elevated terminal for other purposes, but everything that involves Tesla is very enigmatic.
Well, thank you very much. It definitely changes my understanding of the whole thing. I thought I had a pretty good grasp on it, but now I know I don't.
So I was wanting to know also about some of the different experiences that you've had, because I noticed in some of your work you're talking about how the different music and different tones can actually make you feel high, in a sense, and make you feel intoxicated just by listening to music. Do you have any experiences with that?
Well, it's kind of almost a daily experience for me. Because, I have my Bose 901s and my 400-watt amplifier and all my back organ music and handle choruses, and that's the end of every day. That's, there's about a 4-hour interval there where, if I can clear my mind from the noise and negativity and the rest of the stuff and tune into the music, that it creates the transformation.
So it's more or less of less of a mystical experience and more of just a daily practice that gets your body in tune and feeling good.
Yeah, and also it helps me write the stuff that, particularly the polyphase mathematics and all those type of things is in the music, and the mathematical work merges into one. So when I'm listening to the music, then all the equations that I'm developing just pop right out of the music. And then conversely, I just came back from somebody had managed to save from destruction a massive Bell telephone switching facility. It's absolutely stupendous the work this guy did reassembling it. There's 500,000 connections he had to make. It's what's called a step-by-step system. It was the original telephone system, and after living in that building for 10 days and tuning into how the whole thing worked, and, it's basically, it took me 12 years to fully understand the whole thing, but just getting the overview and all that. When I came back and put the block and the handle on, the music had a whole different dimension because the way that the switching system operated was very akin to how the music operated, and I'd heard the music in a way that I'd never heard it before until I had that experience with the telephone exchange. So it kind of works both ways.
Okay. So I know I talked to you, you mentioned going out to the woods and things like that. Can you maybe touch about your experiences about what that can do for you as well, going out and being in tune with nature and how almost maybe resetting yourself?
Well, it's the same situation as then you're in the natural archetypes. Which are quite pronounced because the archetypes, determine the shape of all living organisms, and when you're out in nature, you're amongst all these organisms, and after you're out there enough, and you stay out of Babylon long enough that your senses aren't distorted, you see that there's a geometric archetype or a pattern that ties all this stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
And then you realize that it's not a bunch of separate entities, that you're existing inside a situation that's basically like, you know, sitting in a dark room and closing your eyes and listening to Bach or Handel.
Mm-hmm.
And a similar situation also in this facility that I just made mention of, because the particular way that Bell Telephone operated was truly the eighth wonder of the world. And there was a guy there that, you know, wondered why the guy that built the thing and why myself, why we were attracted to this and why the sounds it made all the time while it was working didn't bother us and what the deal was. And I had just come out of the woods at that point in a very extensive direct contact with the forest for weeks and weeks. And when I got in there with all those, you know, beams of colored wires and the way that all the components are geometrically patterned and all that, I told them, well, here's what's going on. Is the reason why this turns me on is the exact same reason why the forest turns me on.
Mm-hmm.
Or the music of Bach does.
Mm-hmm.
It's because of what level of archetype and it immediately suggests intelligent design, and that's what gets people high. And
yeah.
I still couldn't get it.
No, hey, I get it.
To him, it was just a bunch of relays and wire, you know?
Yeah, it gets me high. I understand.
It's like when they go in the forest, oh, well, you know, there's a bunch of trees and weeds,
yep.
and, you know, that's all it is, you know, and then they go back in their trailer and they fire up the generator and they watch the game. Well, why didn't they stay home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess to kind of tie this question together, there's a renaissance of a practice of what is called grounding. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but what people did, you know, they just are going back to walking barefoot when they can and putting their feet on the ground to ground their energies and feel the energies from the earth moving through their body. And if we're talking about, you know, magnetism or we're talking about electricity, grounding is basically 101 with that. Is there any truth behind grounding?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's you know, I went for 2 years straight in Barinas once without wearing shoes at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I could walk through the blackberry bushes and the whole thing after a while, and that's definitely, there's something about that physical contact with the ground where electrostatically, then, you know, you are at ground potential, where if you're wearing shoes, you're at an arbitrary potential, which, you know, when you're walking on a carpet, you know, you find when you touch the doorknob, you can reach a potential of 25,000 volts or more.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, at one time, I actually managed to get it up to 500,000 volts, somewhat accidentally, and a spark jumped off of my side across the hallway to a fire sprinkler pipe, about maybe 4 feet long. That's 750,000 volts, most likely, or somewhere 500,000 volts.
Okay. Now I think I had the phrase wrong. It's not grounding. It's called earthing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, the British prefer to use the term earth connection, and America prefers to use the term ground connection.
Will it almost, like if you got a lot of stuff going on in your life and stuff, can it work as something that almost resets you, that it literally grounds you back to, you know, what matters? Just getting out in nature, taking your shoes off, being more conscious about things that are going on and, you know, that actually matter.
Well, it's going to do the same thing we've just been talking about with music.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to be on a less physical level.
Yeah.
It's going to be very similar to the situation in the church. There's going to be days when the voltage is high. There's going to be days when the voltage is low. It will depend on all these, you know, cosmic forces that the vegetation's actually, you know, like an antenna tuned into.
Mm-hmm.
And even the animals.
Yeah. They were saying that they've done studies as well where plants and vegetation grow faster when they listen to music, and so I guess that's where the theory comes from of you talking to your plants every day, talking to your flowers and stuff like that.
Yeah, it might be. In that case, it might be a little more than just a mechanical explanation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're dealing with here. There's something more than physics involved with this, but nevertheless, it's related.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's more of a geometrical situation.
Yeah. So with them being alive and everything, and like we're talking about this water experiment and stuff, I think that it matters. I think that it all matters if you're speaking to it. Supposedly they did a experiment as well where they measured the resonance and the frequency from flowers, and whenever they were going to get scissors to go cut these flowers, the resonance and the frequency spiked, like they got scared whenever this was happening. It's almost like whether it's the water or the plant itself, the life from the plant, like something was conscious of what was going on.
Yeah, there was a whole book written on that called The Secret Life of Plants.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that book?
No, who's it by?
I forget right off, but that book had quite an impact on me when I first read it. And it gets very deep into this. Okay.
And I know you have more to say, but I actually have friends who consume certain plants, whether it's ayahuasca, marijuana, things like that, and they talk about having experiences where they come in contact with an entity, like this plant is alive under the consumption of it. Like they meet a woman who says, "I don't want to be smoked," or "You need to respect me," or something like that. Would there be?
Well, that's conceivable.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as far as the world of biology goes, life eats life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, humans are a bit different, and they pretty much eat only dead stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, for a healthy organism, it's a life eats life situation.
Mm-hmm.
So when you consume the plant, you are consuming that entity and its life force and its archetypes, and that's merging with yours.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what Pythagoras taught as well, about eating meat and things, correct?
I'm not certain about that aspect of Pythagoras' work, but that's conceivable.
Yeah, it was much like the Hindu look on it, as far as whenever you consume these animals and you're consuming the blood that you're taking upon the stresses and the things like that animal was going through.
That seems to be somewhat established in, from the knowledge of hunters that, if when they kill an animal and the animal is in a state of distress in that process, it influences the flavor of the meat. But it should be pointed out that humans are not operating as carnivores, but they're operating as carrion eaters.
Mm-hmm.
Well, carnivore actually kills the animal and ingests its living energy. It's the life eats life situation. But as far as crows and vultures and humans and many species of dogs, even though the aforementioned creatures, other than the humans, are designed to eat carrion, mainly because of the bacteria and the other things that are in it, and the life potential, the humans are blatant carrion eaters, and they're just eating, the dead, rotting remains. And so it's going to be pretty much, there's going to be no energetic level at that point, but the influences are going to be, pretty much physiochemical. They're not going to be on an ether level, like if you were eating the animal while it was alive, like a carnivore does.
Yeah, I actually, when I'm not eating right or something like that, or feeling bad because of my diet, consuming plants and vegetables, fresh plants and vegetables, I can feel the life. I can feel the energy coming into me. I'm real conscious of it, and I can actually feel it. I feel 100% better after consuming that. If it's been a while since I had fresh plants and vegetables, I can literally feel it.
Yeah, well, it will actually regenerate your body and heal it.
Mm-hmm.
So, these are the principles I use, because I don't, there's no doctors available for me. I live in the bushes. When I die, my body's going to be thrown in a ditch somewhere. So I've got to fix everything myself, just like my car.
Mm-hmm.
So, if there's going to be anything screwed up, I can't have that. There is no doctor for me, so, the way that I affect that is a living food diet.
Mm-hmm.
And that will cause my teeth to regenerate and any damage to my body to heal, and it makes me resistant to diseases and heat and cold and injury, and my senses are very acute out of it because I'm sticking to the biological principle of life eats life. So if I'm a living entity, I consume living entities to maintain my living energy. Otherwise, then I'm just an ambulatory corpse living on carrion. That's what basically most people in this society are, is they're the walking dead.
And I think that's by design. Would you agree with everything we've been talking about?
Yeah, and it's becoming very symbolic because, the satanic images are tattooed all over people's bodies, and their automobiles are in the shape of it, and it's the whole thing's becoming a society of death worship. Everything has got skulls and knives and axes and blades, and virtually every third, fourth person in this town has an emblem of some kind of skull or destructive device to kill emblazoned on either their body or their clothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All that, yeah.
So there's not. This society is reaching its terminal phase.
Mm-hmm.
It won't make it much longer.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's strictly a fanatic worship of death and destruction.
Yeah. But there is power in returning back to the source, correct?
And we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no amount of weaponry that's going to fight your way out of this thing because it's highly organized and it's got more than you do.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can do is to switch the whole thing around and operate on the primary level of what we've been talking about with Pythagoras and the powers that these people had back then that are forgotten now.
I mean, I think I'm with you 100%. I don't think that the New Age movement or a lot of people who are, waking up to a lot of this stuff, whether even if it's the Christian church or whatever, to wake up to these ancient principles that have been lost. I think that it will help us in our personal lives, like everything you've been saying, and it's actually helping you. But so I think that's why people find peace in acknowledging a higher power, someone who maybe will come through at the end and help us from these demonic beings who are controlling everything that's going on. I think people have a hope that there is something that's going to happen, whether you believe in God, whether you believe in Jesus Christ coming back, or ETs coming to save us in the end, who have been watching over us the whole time and are eventually going to be like, okay, enough is enough. Do you have any hope in a higher power, that something is guiding us that may be a little bit more intelligent and have our best interest in mind that's out there?
Well, no. I kind of look at it more from, like a military standpoint.
Okay.
But, it's either going to be evasion or defense or some type of situation. When you look at things from a biblical standpoint, the human race has never entered such an era of disnality, ever. Mm-hmm. Ever.
Okay.
Has anything like this ever existed.
Mm-hmm.
It's by definition, in those levels of understanding, it's terminal.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know what the time constant is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, we know the circuit's overloaded, but, is it a 60 amp fuse, or is it a 70 amp fuse, or is it a 100 amp fuse that's going to blow? We don't know what the size of the fuse is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to blow.
Yeah.
So it could get thousands of times more worse than this.
Mm-hmm.
It could turn into a hell that no one would ever have conceived. To me, it already is.
Mm-hmm.
If I went and I grabbed Martin Luther or J.S. Bach or Kepler or any of these people that created the world that I exist in, and I transferred them to here, and I have them walk out the door and look out to the street in this town, they would immediately go insane. Their brain would explode because they know that they were in hell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that when we're talking about a higher power or ETs or whatever the case is, something that may come and help us or something like that, a lot of people sit by passive, where they understand, well, I don't have to do anything because somebody's coming to save me. Well,
that's the whole cop-out. That's why I don't subscribe to that.
Exactly. But there are a lot of people waking up. There are a lot of people who want to get back in touch with nature, who seek the best interest of others, and who see others as an extension of themselves. And whether you want to call that getting back to spirituality or what, I think we need to enjoy this life and embrace each other and embrace life in general. And that's why I had you on the show, because I think you're explaining the scientific methods, like I said earlier, of a lot of the philosophies and a lot of the sciences behind spirituality that's written in a lot of holy books. So I think the whole, Jesus is coming back to save us, or Buddha or Muhammad or whatever, is actually used as a cop-out, because people, they tend to not do anything, or they
actually makes me angry to watch these people, behave the way they do, and think, I'm going to be saved and I'm going to go to heaven, so it doesn't matter. I tell these people, and it angers them. I go, it doesn't work like that. I go, Jesus left in his spaceship, and he's not coming back. And there is not one person on this planet today, not one, that is going to heaven. So just get that out of your mind. Then they choke and they'll never talk to me again. So that's fine. It insults me to have that keep throwing in my face and throwing in my face. I watch these people behave like savages and just trash everything around them. But they go to church and they pray on Sunday, and so what we do, we call that insurance policy Christianity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the other level, then they want to pray in the morning for when we go out, we're going to find more gold. Well, I would call that rewards card Christianity. And I just have to tell these people I cannot engage in either one of those things, because it's against my upbringing. As I come from a long line Christian background of priests, nuns, and monks, and all that to go back 800 years. People want to start spouting this stuff off, and I can't handle it, because I was not made like that.
Yeah, and so I guess what you're saying is exact same thing I'm saying, and a lot of other people, is that what you're seeing from the church now, claiming to be the ones who get you in tune with God, are doing the exact opposite and just using.
Yeah, so what I do is just like the person like I'm referring to in Los Angeles, where I work there, that exhibits these things that I just said. So why don't you come to church on Sunday? Well, the last thing I want to do is go into Los Angeles on Sunday. When the whole freak circus is crawling, and to risk my car and my personal body and the rest of that, when I go, well, here's what you need to do. You need to come to my church, because they all wonder where I go at the end of the day, and I disappear in some Jeep trail up in the mountains. It's hardly drivable, so nobody will bother me. And the altimeter hand is moving like a second hand on a clock while I'm crawling up the face of a mountain. That's where I go at the end of the day. I go, you need to come to my church, the Church of God's Creation.
Exactly. I'm with you there, brother.
Not some hole where a bunch of carrion-eating people all go to jerk themselves off, and they're going to go to heaven. Everybody else is going to go to hell because they're a piece of dead meat that rocks. I don't want to be part of it. The only reason why, in my adult life, where I went to the churches was the big ones that had the organs.
I
was there for the building, and I was there for the sound. I wasn't there for the rap.
Yeah, and you know what? They have people saying that on a very small scale now, as far as they go to church to enjoy the music, or they don't really know the people or agree with the preaching, but they enjoy the music. They have great music there.
I'm a Lutheran, and that's what Lutheranism is based on. It's music. Music is access to God.
Yeah, exactly.
Not somebody's oscillating tongue.
Exactly. I think that's what we've been saying. There's a couple more minutes for you to be on the show. I want to touch on crystals. If you can tell me anything about crystals. There's a lot of people talk about crystals hold energy, quartz, and things like that. We understand that crystals were in radios and were used as a conductor of electricity. Am I correct on that?
Quartz crystals are used in all radio equipment to this day, because quartz has an interesting property. If mechanical force is applied to it, it produces electrical force, and if electrical force is applied to it, it produces a mechanical force. So it's a reciprocal situation. So you can cause a quartz crystal to mechanically vibrate, which will give rise to electrical vibration, which in turn goes into a circuit that turns it back into mechanical vibration, and it compounds on itself, and it sings at a frequency. And that's the frequency of like your silly phone, or the clock rate on your computer, or whatever device you have gets its rhythm and frequencies from one particular piece of quartz. Now, the other crystal, the crystal radios and the crystal rectifiers, that's what's inside the transistors.
Mm-hmm.
And these crystals change their conductivity and the way that they pass electricity by the electrical force that's applied to them, so that you can apply a small electrical force to a particular crystalline substance, such as iron sulfide or pyrite, and that small electrical force will cause a much larger electrical response in the crystal, and in a certain sense kind of pull the wave in, and that serves as a detector.
Mm-hmm.
So normally the feeble radio waves or electrical impulses are not strong enough to cause a mechanical action on a relay or anything like that, but if you apply that to the crystal changes inside, and all of a sudden the crystal turns from one electrical state to another and lets you know this thing's there, and then it will close a relay, or, if the oscillations are fast enough, it can move the armature on a speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And these devices today are known as diodes and transistors.
Mm-hmm. We did
so those are the two different types of crystalline applications in electricity. For quartz, now, you can go beyond, but, we're in a continuously changing electrical field of varying intensity. Well, that has an influence on all the quartz. Then, of course, you have all the quartz, and the mechanical stresses on that have an influence on electricity, and this has a lot to do with my telluric wave research and earthquake things and stuff like that. Is just massive quantities of frequencies and waveforms being produced by the Earth, and it's very difficult to account for exactly how they would come about from the way geologists and physicists describe the construction of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a whole different topic.
Yeah. We did.
I've got somebody that's going to be calling me for an interview here shortly on that subject.
Okay. And
because that's actually, that's the project I'm engaged in here right now with the government and all that, and we just got our funding to go, work on our polls and the whole thing to be able to tap back into this again. It's going to be quite an effort.
We actually just did a podcast about crystal magic and about the energy that is stored in crystals and actually released from crystals as well. And we kind of liken that to the scepter of a king or the staff of a magician with the crystal on the end of it, and where there's thoughts or frequencies to be released as an extension from the hand and released at the end of the rod or the end of the staff to bring about whichever type of magic you want to deal with. There's a lot of different types of magic, and as far as frequencies and vibrations and causing things to happen differently. And that's what we've been talking about the whole show, sound and vibration. And
well, the crystals, are very highly organized, chemical and electrical patterns, physical electrical patterns, however you want to describe it. So that causes them to be archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
So a crystal, in a certain sense, is very similar to the Chaldean and Pythagorean concept of the number.
Uh-huh.
So it gives it a power on that level that's beyond, electrical or physical explanation.
Mm-hmm.
On the bottom level. You're dealing with archetypes again, formative forces. And again, that's going to be modulated by the overall cosmic induction, which changes, from minute to minute and day to day.
So they have their own equation, each crystal, whether it's an amethyst or a ruby or something like that, correct? Everything's going to be different, right?
Well, they're all going to have their on archetype.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you break them down or, you fracture them and look at the patterns, they create the same pattern. They're a specific form. No matter how fine you divide them, they're still the same shape.
Okay.
And that serves as an archetype.